Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Makiza Latifa. Let's begin with China currents. Here is Lisa with a weekly news report of what's been trending in China. This week, topics for discussion include the inauguration of the new Taiwan leader on May 20th and the Chinese Foreign Ministry's response on May 21st. We'll also look at the relations between China and Iran as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang has reiterated his support for Iran, stating that China will continue to strengthen strategic cooperation with Iran, safeguard common interest, and make efforts for regional and global peace. The concluding part of China Currents with Lisa will also focus a bit on technology and the strides made by a team of Chinese researchers in the world of neuromorphic computing.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Hello from Shanghai, this is Lisa. Welcome to another episode of China Currents, your weekly news report of what's trending in China. Let's start this episode by looking at the inauguration of the new Taiwan leader, Lai Ching-te. On May 20th, Lai Ching-te delivered a provocative speech at the ceremony, which he claimed that mainland and Taiwan are two countries, and he will ally with the West to combat the mainland. Lai talked about the island's political system and freedom, and hyped so-called political and military intimidation from the mainland. In response, Chinese Foreign Ministry said on May 21st that the pursuit of Taiwan independence is a futile endeavor that will lead to detrimental and calamitous consequences for Taiwan Island. The US and certain external forces' attempts to manipulate the Taiwan card to contain China will only serve to destabilize the region further. The Chinese government reiterated its firm opposition to Taiwan independence and emphasized its unwavering stance against any form of separatist activities, following Lai Ching-te's speech upon assuming the role of Taiwan region's new leader on Monday. Spokesperson for the State Council Taiwan Affairs Office said on Monday that Lai's speech stubbornly followed the Taiwan independence stance, advocated separatism, incited cross-strait confrontations, and sought independence by relying on foreign support and by force. On the same day, Chinese state media Global Times published an editorial stating that the motherland must be unified, and it will inevitably be unified. Regardless of changes in the situation on the island or who holds the power, it cannot change the fact that both sides of the strait belong to one China, nor can it change the fundamental pattern and direction of cross-strait relations or block the historical trend of the eventual reunification of the motherland. Lai-style Taiwan independence will only exacerbate the confrontation and instability across the straits, inevitably leading to self-overestimation and self-destruction. On May 23rd, 3 days after Lai's speech, the Chinese People's Liberation Army (PLA) suddenly launched a military exercise surrounding the island of Taiwan. According to state media, it is in a mood to punish Taiwan independent successionist force and to send a warning to belligerent external forces. As you can see on the map, this drill is designed to surround the island of Taiwan from both the east and the west. The exercises display the PLA's strike capability across all directions of the island without any blind spots, forming a situation where the island is pinned down from both sides. The drills are also being conducted in the islands of Jinmen, Mazu, Wuqiu, and Dongying. Next up, let's turn to a list of sanctions. On May 21st, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that it will take countermeasures in accordance with the law against Mike Gallagher, a former US representative from Wisconsin and former US congressman. for his frequent words and actions over the past years that have interfered in China's internal affairs, in other words, Taiwan. According to the official release, the countermeasures consist of freezing the former US lawmakers' movable, immovable, and other types of assets in China, prohibiting organizations and individuals in China from engaging in relevant transactions and cooperation with him, and denying visas and entry into China. Gallagher, who previously served as chairman of the House of Representatives Select Committee on China, has pushed through a series of anti-China bills, including one forcing China tech company ByteDance to divert short video apps TikTok or see it banned in the US. He also led a congressional delegation to visit China's Taiwan region in February and declared during the trip that no matter who wins the upcoming election, support for Taiwan will not change. Besides Gallagher, on May 22nd, the Chinese Foreign Ministry announced countermeasures against 12 US defense corporations and 10 US individuals. The latest target of China's countermeasures include Lockheed Martin missiles and fire control, Raytheon missile system, and a senior executive of General Dynamics Information Technology. In the announcement, the Chinese Foreign Ministry cited China's anti-foreign sanctions law, noting that the US has imposed illegal unilateral sanctions on multiple Chinese entities under the pretext of alleged Russian factors, engaging in unilateral bullying and economic coercion. The Foreign Ministry also stressed that the US has continued to sell weapons to the Taiwan region of China, seriously violating the One China principle and the provision of the 3 Sino-US joint communiques, interfering in China's internal affairs and seriously undermining China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Next up, the Middle East. China said on May 21st that it hopes that the International Criminal Court will uphold an objective and fair stance and exercise its power in accordance with the law after the ICC applied for arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders. Chinese expert told Chinese state media that the ICC seeking Israel and Hamas warrants serves more of a symbolic pressure as its enforcement mechanism faces challenges. Yet they noted the move will still increase moral and public pressure against Israel, leading to greater scrutiny under international law. According to Al Jazeera, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan said on May 20th that his office had applied for arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders for alleged crimes committed during the Hamas-led October 7th attack on southern Israel and Israel's subsequent war on Gaza. Regarding the arrest warrant, Chinese Foreign Ministry said that we have noted relevant reports. We want to stress that the international community has overwhelmingly consensus on the need for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and ending the humanitarian crisis suffered by the Palestinians. Next up, Iran. Following the tragic helicopter crash that killed Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian, and several other officials on May 19th, Chinese and Iranian officials have reiterated their resolution to continue to strengthen the strategic cooperation between the two countries, as media from both ends noted that the passing of Raisi will not affect the overall direction and development of China-Iran relations, nor will it bring about fundamental changes in Iran's domestic politics. On May 28, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang met with Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Maki Safari, who represents Iran, to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs in Astana. Wang again expressed his condolences and sympathy for the unfortunate passing of Raisi and Abdullahian, which he said, regardless of how the situation may change, China will continue to strengthen strategic cooperation with Iran, safeguard common interests, and make efforts for regional and global peace. Safari thanked the Chinese side for its steadfast support for Iran and emphasized that Iran's domestic and foreign policies will not change. Iran attaches great importance to its relations with China and is committed to enhancing cooperation in various fields such as politics, economy, and culture, stating that Iran is willing to continue the relevant processes and work towards improving relations with regional countries. Next up, technology. A typical computer chip, such as one found in a personal desktop for non-professional use, consumes around 100 watts of power. AI, on the other hand, requires significantly more energy. It is estimated that ChatGPT would consume approximately 300 watts per second to answer a single question. In contrast, the human brain is much more energy efficient, requiring only around 10 watts of power, comparable to that of a light bulb. This exceptional energy efficiency is one of the reasons why scientists are interested in modeling the next generation of microchips after the human brain. In the bustling tech landscape of Hangzhou, China, a team of researchers at Zhejiang University has made a significant leap in the world of neuromorphic computing with the development of their latest innovation, the Darwin 3 chip. This groundbreaking piece of technology promises to transfer how we stimulate brain activity, paving the way for advancement in artificial intelligence, robots, and beyond. Neuromorphic chips are designed to emulate the architecture and function of the human brain. Unlike traditional computers that process information in linear, step-by-step manner, the chip operates more like our brains, processing multiple streams of information simultaneously and adapting to new data in real time. The Darwin 3 chip is a marvel of modern engineering, specifically designed to work with spiking neural networks. SNNs are a type of artificial neural network that mimics the way the neurons and synapses in the human brain communicate. While conventional neural networks use continuous signals to process information, SNNs use discrete spikes, much like the burst of electrical impulses that our neuron emits. One of the standout features of Darwin 3 is its flexibility in stimulating various types of neurons. Just as an orchestra can produce a wide range of sound by utilizing different instruments, Darwin 3 can emulate different neural models to suit a variety of tasks, from basic pattern recognition to complex decision-making processes. To achieve this goal, Darwin 3's key innovation is its domain-specific instruction set architecture. This custom-designed set of instructions allows the chip to efficiently describe diverse neuron models and learning rules, including the integrate and fire model and spike time-independent plasticity. This versatility enabled Darwin 3 to tackle a wide range of computational tasks, making it a highly adaptable tool for AI development. Another significant breakthrough is Darwin 3's efficient memory usage. Neuromorphic computing faces the challenge of managing vast amounts of data involved in stimulating neuron connections. Darwin 3 overcomes this hurdle with an innovative compression mechanism that dramatically reduces memory usage. Imagine shrinking a massive library of books into a single compact e-reader without losing any content. This is akin to what Darwin 3 achieved with synaptic connections. Perhaps the more exciting feature of Darwin 3 is its on-chip learning capability. This allows the chip to learn and adapt in real time, much like how humans learn from experience. Darwin 3 can modify its behavior based on new information, leading to smarter and more autonomous systems. The implications of Darwin 3's technology are far-reaching and transformative. In healthcare, prosthetic limbs powered by Darwin 3 could learn and adapt to a user's movement, offering a more intuitive and natural experience. This could significantly enhance the quality of life for amputees. In robotics, robots equipped with Darwin 3 can navigate complex environments with greater ease and efficiency, similar to how humans learn to maneuver through crowded spaces. This capability could revolutionize industries from manufacturing to space exploration. Environmental monitoring could also benefit from Darwin 3. Smart sensors using Darwin 3 could analyze environmental data in real time, providing immediate insights into climate conditions and helping us better manage natural resources. The Darwin 3 chip represents a monumental step forward in neuromorphic computing, bringing us closer to creating machines that can think and learn in ways previously thought impossible. As this technology continues to evolve, we anticipate a future where intelligent systems seamlessly integrate into our daily lives, enhancing everything from medical care to environmental conservation. The research is recently published in the journal's National Science Review. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts and comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. I'm Lisa, look forward to hearing from you and see you next time.
Thank you, Lisa, for the updates. Next up is the Thinkers Forum, where our scholars and thinkers present to you their analysis on global trends. Let's begin with Jan Oberg, a political science academic, a peace researcher, and the director of the Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research.
It's only a matter of time before that West will be stopped from dominating by the rest of the world, and it will fall apart from the inside. There are tons of people in this part of the world who no longer believes that they have any influence, and that is dangerous, and it's incompatible with democracy. So prepare the future, a global governance, democratic governance, where people can freely express their wishes for the future, and they're taken into a global dialogue, and we vote for it, and we go in the direction that the majority want to go. And that's democracy. The most important thing about democracy is taking the minorities into account. Democracy is not just to do what the majority says. If you have 51%, it doesn't mean that you can ignore the 49. We don't need any kind of majority dictatorship, even if it's democratic. We need the justice, the fairness, the equality that is also mentioned in the Panchila from 54 that I mentioned before. Peaceful coexistence is about taking the others into account when you make a decision yourself. It's not just even if you are the biggest or the strongest or you have the majority to do whatever you please. We have raw, pragmatic politics that leads to hell. When I was young, which is many years ago, the Nordic countries where I live, the Nordic, what we normally see as Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Greenland, were countries where we had a lively idea, or if you will, ideological debate. We talked about what is the welfare state, what is the purpose of the state vis-a-vis the people. What will the future look like if we do this and if we do that? And of course, people were disagreeing on what was a good society. But without that type of idea debate, we're also lost completely. There's no guiding lines anymore if you don't know what you do, and if you don't know why you do what you do. It becomes panic, helter-skelter, knee-jerk reactions, as we saw, for instance, when Russia did its limited military operation into Ukraine. We said, oh, look at that, it's out of the blue, it's unprovoked, and now we got to punish this country and this man. They didn't even make an analysis of what the economic sanctions would be, have for what implications the economic sanctions, which are the hardest in human history, would have on our own society. I mean, some of us predicted, what happens if we cannot import, gas anymore from, and what happens if you bomb Nord Stream and things like that. I mean, what about thinking at least a few months ahead? But the alcoholic does not think months ahead. The alcoholic looks at the half bottle that is still left and drinks it. And then tomorrow you wake up with a hangover and say, I did it again. And my future is not going to get better from it. That's where we are today. In my view, it's my view. I'm not saying it's the whole truth, but it's part of the truth. Some of what I've said may sound to you like I'm a pessimist. I'm not a pessimist. I believe in people's will, vision, and hard work. But I am a pessimist when it comes to the short term, the next few years in which we are coming closer. I would be an idiot if I didn't tell you. We are coming closer to the risk of a major war in Europe. But I'm saying it doesn't have to go that far. But the idea I have is if we get through this, and if we can hope for the US empire and NATO to disappear, and the United States will flourish, etc., and we find other ways of talking with each other about conflicts. I think there's so much we can build on in the world. There's such an energy from the billions of people who live. There's so many good things that have happened the last 30, 40 years, not the least China's development. I mean, I was in China first time in 1983. I saw how poor it was, partly how dirty it was, how underdeveloped it was. And I'm now going frequently to China. I'm seeing what a fantastic society it is in many ways. Deeply impressive. The West is not interested. The West is not even curious. How you uplift 700 million people from poverty is not interested for Americans who still have 20% at least living under the poverty line. You'll hear Mr. Biden and everybody else say, oh, we've done a lot to solve this problem. We set off $10 billion to solve it, right? It doesn't help. It doesn't help. You decided to change your society such that you could uplift 700 million people. You did not just pour money into poor people who didn't know how to spend it, but you gave them education, you gave them opportunities, you listened to them. I mean, all these things are quality development, whereas the West is thinking in terms of quantity development. Everything is measured by money. So the idea is, could we have a discussion at some point about global ethics? A global ethic would mean something like sustainability, of course, in a serious sense of that word. Don't do anything that makes, in the long run, that's a time perspective, our common living on this globe unsustainable. And here you have to particularly think of those who are disadvantaged, not the people at Wall Street, not the rich people in every capital of the world. And finally, well, there's much more to say about it, of course, but finally it would mean, and that's a very interesting angle to future new democracy, can you take the non-born, the not yet born people into your consideration? Because from a time perspective, everything we do will influence future generations. So simply put, could we take into account those who are not yet born and ask, what I do now, is that a good thing or a bad thing for those who come 3 or 4 generations after me? They cannot vote, they cannot voice their concerns. And that's something which is very difficult for particularly Westerners, because that is what we call a non-reciprocal relationship. We act like we have no children, no grandchildren. It doesn't matter what happens after us. So the global ethics would be to take a democratic vote from the not yet born people and ask, what would you like? And then we use imagination. But it means we can't have a contract with them. Like, I do this for you, you do this for me. Typical Western thinking, I don't do anything for you if you don't do anything for me. That is gone philosophically. We have to do things for each other and for those yet not born. And if we do that, we benefit ourselves. If we get rid of the US empire, we will have a better world, but the United States will be a better place. I mean, think of the burden from that militarist alcoholism that they are suffering from, spending almost half of the world's military expenditures among, 350 million people. Think of what that money could do, and that's a concept of opportunity cost. Always, when you see a bill for the military or for warfare, ask yourself, what could I get instead for that? How could I invest that money constructively? What is the alternative consumption instead of this? And the moment you begin to think of that, you could, of course, sit down and cry, because every moment, for the hour we've been sitting here now, the world has lost billions of dollars on warfare, on arms production, while people are suffering, while people are dying, while people are hungry to bed. That does not need to happen. It's a matter of the perverse priorities of the world, which spends 400 times more on weapons than on the United Nations. That's a moral problem. That's an ethical problem. It's something that would be impossible if we had a global ethics. We only have a neighborhood Christian ethics, which is totally insufficient. I'm not saying everything is bad in it, but I'm saying it's insufficient. You need to build global thinking on it. And those are non-material things to round it off is what I deeply believe we've got to talk about in the future if we want to survive. We cannot be pragmatic all the time. We have to have goals. We have to have long-range thinking. We have to have macro thinking in terms of time and space. Long-term perspective, what will happen in the next 40, 50 years? How can we shape it ourselves? Macro thinking, the whole world, not just my own national society. Nationalism, as François Mitterrand said shortly before he died, nationalism means war. Globalism does not mean war, it means coexistence, hopefully based on the 5 principles of the Panchil from 1954. Let's pull out the good things. Let's pull out Gandhi. Let's put out Chu Enlai and Nero. Let's put out the people who've been thinking about what it means to be human, instead of listening, to influencers and foreign minister, press spokespeople, etc.
Next on the Thinkers Forum is Dr. Haico Ebbers, a professor of international economics at Yuan Business University, who happens to be an esteemed scholar in Chinese economy and EU relations, ready to share with us insights on the yuan's role in the global economy.
The economic dominance will create the reserve currency. So in general, the biggest economy will have the reserve currency, but with quite a big time lag. So if you look at the UK, when it was dominating the world economics, the pound sterling was the reserve currency, clearly. And then it was taken over by the US in terms of economic dominance. So the US took over economic dominance already in the 1920s or so. But it took about 40 years before the dollar, or 50 years, before the dollar became the reserve currency. If you look at the US dollar, it's really dominating capital flows and trade flows. There are, of course, issues that certain countries are not using the dollar for geopolitical reasons, and they are using the euro for that in many aspects. So part of the market is now also taken over by the euro, but still the dollar is extremely dominant. And my expectation is that it will stay dominant for many decades to go. The market is just too big, and although China will become in economic dimension bigger than the US, it will take a while before you can take over the reserve currency status. Also because in China we don't have capital convertibility yet, and it is mostly built on trust. So there are initiatives that, for example, in the bilateral trade between China and Thailand, or China and South Korea, now we are using also the local currency for these bilateral trade flows. And these are small steps. But I don't think we are on the edge of a sort of structural change where we see less domination of the dollar. Now, if you look at an exchange rate system, obviously you can make a choice between floating system and a more managed or fixed system. And there is a trilemma happening in that. So if you have a fixed currency system and you want to have your own autonomy of your central bank using interest rate for domestic reasons, then you have to have capital protectionism, then you have to have capital restrictions. So that's the choice. If you have a fixed currency, you have to give up free capital flows. If you are moving into a floating system, then you can have free capital flows and you have your central bank autonomy, but then you don't have your fixed system. Then you have your floating system. So there's an impossible trilemma between a fixed system, capital convertibility, and central bank autonomy. You have to give up one of the three in one way or the other. Now in China, they choose for fixing the currency to the US dollar. And that means that they have to have capital restrictions. Otherwise the volatility will be too much to manage and to keep the currency within the margin towards the US dollar. So the choice for a fixed currency system makes it needed that there is capital inconvertibility, that there is no free capital flows. Now, a precondition for creating a reserve currency is clearly that there are free capital flows. But if you have free capital flows, you have to give up your fixed exchange rate system. And then your exchange rate is driven by market forces. And that may create a lot of volatility, sometimes up, sometimes down. A low currency value is helpful because it may create more export. But also it is importing inflation, because with the low currency exchange, import prices are going up relatively. So you may help export, but you are creating domestic inflation. If the currency is too high, you may reduce export. Export becomes very difficult, but import prices are being deflating because of that. So these are choices made by the government in terms of the currency system and the currency level. When I started working on my book, there was a feeling that I want to give my students, but also the audience, a flavor how the world is changing. And one of these aspects of the changing world is indeed that there is an enormous amount of catching up by emerging markets, and that these emerging markets are growing in a different way than what we did in the West. They are growing also in the future because of the optimum combination of market and government. While in the West we were able to grow on market forces mostly. But in many emerging markets now, they are growing on finding the optimum between market and government interference. They also have quite a different opinion on globalization. The growing economies, the emerging markets, they believe in globalization, for sure. They believe in a positive-sum game. But at the same time, they believe also in national sovereignty and in strategic autonomy. And therefore, they want to protect. They want to have the freedom to protect. So they are looking for the optimum combination of globalization and national sovereignty. Now, these elements are being put together in the book on the rise of the new economic powers and the changing global landscape. And I start the book with a quote that according to me, today's younger generation, they will be working and living and studying in a world for the first time in modern history, which is not dominated by the West anymore. And that is why I think we need to understand not only the catching up of these new economic powers, the emerging markets, including China, but also how they shape the future of globalization. Because the globalization process will be quite different, because now we have emerging markets that are able to shape the globalization process. And if you look at certain emerging markets like India or Brazil or Turkey, they also will do things differently than what China is doing. So by looking at these two angles, the Western point of view and the emerging markets point of view, I think we can learn a lot. And that may reduce misperceptions on what is happening on the other side of the world. It's clear that the economic relationship between China and the EU is very substantial, obviously. If you look at export flows, import flows, so international trade relation, bilateral trade relation is enormous. And again, I would say that is driven by the attitude of a positive-sum game, that we can win. We have winners and winners in a sense. There is sensitivity on certain elements of sectors in international trade. For example, we believe in Europe that the prices of solar panels from China, that they are too low, and that companies are getting subsidies from the local government to reduce the price, and it is being dumped on the EU market. So there are clearly sensitivities happening. But in a sense, in this economic relationship, from an economic point of view, I still expect a positive sum game attitude and narrative on that. And we have to solve all these sensitivities for sure. But these are sensitivities on certain sectors and sometimes very specific sectors. Now, there's also sensitivity in geopolitical arena. I always found that more difficult to solve because a geopolitical issue relates to power, and power is automatically a zero-sum game. So if I have more power, you have less power. So there are winners and losers in power. And that makes a discussion on political globalization much more difficult than economic globalization. So I think, of course, we have sensitivities in economic globalization, but we can solve that. If you look at the next coming years, we will solve that step by step. We will hopefully be able to understand each other in many aspects, and that may help. But the discussion on political globalization, for example, in the IMF or the World Bank, is much more complicated because there we have this zero-sum game. I think the One Belt, One Road initiative is very important for China, but also for many parts of the world. If you look at the main motives, the drivers behind this initiative, that is driven obviously also by domestic factors, like the excess of export and also finding markets in other parts of the world. And many parts of the world, they are also looking for capital and for investments because they don't believe that they can borrow money from the IMF or the World Bank so easily anymore, and they have to follow all these conditions from the IMF and the World Bank. So for them it is also very attractive to ask China for finance and investments. Although the initiative is seen in the West as an building up China's activities in many neighboring countries and hence to create a sort of Asian trading bloc or an Asian region, clearly it is should also be seen as an initiative for connecting to many other parts of the world, so from a global perspective. I think one element which we may underestimate is the importance of foreign direct investments by the Chinese based on this initiative in many parts of the world. Mostly the emphasis is on trade, but there's a lot of capital involved also. And luckily most of the countries, they are able to fine-tune their needs, to indicate their needs. And again, they have options. They can go to the IMF, they can ask money from the World Bank, and they may ask also bilateral capital flows from China. And then it is up to these countries how they assess the pros and the cons. So it is an important initiative also for the rest of the world.
And that's all for today's Thinkers Forum. Now allow me to introduce to you our latest segment, China Academy Top Picks, which is a current affairs analysis show brought to you by the China Academy team. Now the US has threatened to shut down EUV if China reunifies with Taiwan by force. To get more clarity on this, please keep watching.
On May 23rd to 24th, Chinese PLA kicked off military drills encircling Taiwan. If that raised explosive tensions, brace yourself for the technological nuclear bomb the United States previously threatened to detonate. 2 days ago, Bloomberg cited sources claiming that the semiconductor giants ASML and TSMC can remotely disable their chip-making equipment if mainland China attacks Taiwan. ASML and TSMC are the undistributed titan of global chip production today. If the claim is true and they went ahead with it, it would trigger a catastrophic breakdown in the worldwide semiconductor supply chain and in turn disrupt digital device manufacturing. This would cripple Taiwan's economy, but it would also backfire and hurt the US economically. That's because so many major American tech companies rely on the chips from TSMC. The surprising part isn't the high level of technology involved, it's not particularly advanced, but rather the questionable intelligence and mindset behind the US issuing such a self-destructive threat. To provide some context, here are the key points. Chinese communications expert Xiang Ligang believes remotely disabling lithography machine is technically feasible, but there are countermeasures against remote sabotage that could allow operations to restart. However, the shockwaves would still be catastrophic for companies and device makers dependent on the chips. TSMC is a civilian company, but the advanced chip it produces supply major US tech giants like Qualcomm, Apple, Nvidia, AMD, a huge chunk of the American semiconductor industry. If TSMC lithography machines were neutralized, there are two monumental issues. One, under what law can ASML cripple a customer's machine? That would decimate their commercial credibility. Who would ever import their equipment again? The temporary edge would quickly erode as rivals caught up. It's a self-destructive plan. If TSMC's operations were paralyzed, wouldn't that obliterate scores of US companies? Wouldn't the entire American chip industry supply collapse? Industry analyst Lin Wen of the China Academy further argues that simply shutting down TSMC may not achieve this intended goal. The crucial parts of EUVs can be reused even after being shut down. As we know, the most crucial part of an EUV machine for microchip production is the optical system, specifically the projection optics and illumination system. These components play a vital role in directing and focusing the extreme ultraviolet light onto the silicon wafer, allowing the creation of intricate patterns that defines the functionality of each microchip. The optical system, including mirrors that reflect and direct light with nanometer precision, is essential for achieving the high level of detail and precision required in lithography processes. Keeping the optical system intact will render the whole remotely disabling technique pointless. Lin Wen also put forward another possible scenario. What if China doesn't need these EUVs by then? In fact, Chinese companies are taking a very different approach than their Western counterparts in building lithography machines. According to reports, Huawei and China Semiconductor Manufacturing International Co., SMIC, have submitted patents for a chip production method called self-aligned quadruple patterning, SAQP. The SAQP process enables the creation of microchip patterns that have dimensions smaller than what can be achieved using traditional photolithography techniques alone. It accomplishes this through a multi-layer patterning approach that mimics the meticulous construction of an extremely detailed scale model. Specifically, it first deposits an initial layout of wider features and leaves spacing in between to guide subsequent steps. Rail-like structures are then formed on the side of these features to designate where narrow patterns will be placed. Then the initial features are removed, leaving only the rail structures behind, upon which a thin layer of material is deposited to start forming mini-scaled features between the rails. Excess materials are cleaned away to reduce these dimensions even further. The process repeats, adding more rail structures and then selectively etching materials to carve out increasingly finer lines and spaces that can be as narrow as a third the width of a human hair. This allows integrated circuit manufacturers to print vastly smaller circuitry elements than standard photolithography is technically capable of achieving in a single photochemical exposure. Using SAQP, Huawei and SMIC will produce 5nm class processed microchips, which will meet most of the demand. With that being said, the more important message here for the US policymakers is to never look at the Taiwan issue through the lens of semiconductor production. When comparing with China's reunification, these two issues have different levels of magnitude.
And that was indeed insightful. I hope you had a great time with us on today's edition of China Now. I am Makiza Latifa. Please send in your comments, thoughts, feedback and suggestions through the email provided below. Until we meet again next week, is bye from myself and the entire production team. Enjoy the rest of our programs.